to tell about their experience of how they overcame the data and digitalization challenges. And the real objective of the session is, while they tell you about their experiences, that you reflect on some of the challenges you may still have regarding data and digitalization, and then we can together with the panel find out whether some of their experiences are helpful for you to actually solve these problems. The good news of the session, because it's about digitalization, is there's not going to be a single PowerPoint slide, because that's the type of digitalization we're not interested in. That's the bad digitalization. There's not going to be a live demo of the platform either. We're going to do that for those interested at the booth in the conference tent. And it's really about, you know, having almost like anecdotal evidence of why data and digitalization may still be in the specific sector we're all working in, energy access and SDG 7, underrepresented. I come from a company that is called Mobisol, years ago in the solar home system sector, now Access to Energy Institute as a non-for-profit institute. And I think since 10 years, digital is model or existence. So at Mobisol, there was a remote monitoring platform where we could see every single of our systems. That's 10 years ago. When you speak with many stakeholders of the sector today, some of them who are responsible for electrification don't have access to any kind of digital platform of visualization. So something where the pioneers in the sector have implemented 10 years ago is still not at the core of the activities. And the Access to Energy Institute is a non-for-profit which has the remit of developing those open source solutions that the sector needs, but that are not available. So because we're non-for-profit, everything we do is kind of free of charge. So the Prospect platform in particular is not a business model. It's a tool that we want to give to all the stakeholders in the sector to do what they need to do around data, around reporting, about digitalization. And I'm going to not introduce all the panel now, but introduce the panelists one after the other. And I'm going to give the word to Vivien Barnier, who's the CEO of the N-Access Foundation. And I think I was saying that jokingly before, his professional obsession is open source and why digital is so key to the sector. You have the word.
Thank you, Thomas, for this keen introduction and to inviting me on this panel. And as you already said, I want particularly stress the point on open source in digitalization and data. At the N-Access Foundation, we are convinced that open source is completely underrepresented in our sector of energy access today. So much companies and even NGOs and non-for-profits are sitting on data and on information, on innovations that they have developed, which are kind of necessary for their business, but they are in the end exactly the same that their competitors or the other organization are using. And we really believe that there's a big gap in data sharing and information sharing and tool sharing in the sector, which would allow to work much more efficiently in creating viable business models. Because spending the time for an energy access organization on developing their own data management platform, their own battery management system, or a smart meter, which I know there are commercial solutions, but I also know from my former experience in the mini-grid sector that a lot of mini-grid companies actually engaged in developing their own smart meter. And this is where an access says, wait, this is not what an energy access company should do. An energy access company should use technology, and if they are not the commercial availability solution for them, then they should be able to use an open source solution for collecting their data, measuring their data, measuring the energy, and then putting it on a platform where they can see the energy. I mean, it still needs to be hosted. There's still costs related to it, but they should not spend their time in developing these kind of innovations and these kind of tools. They should innovate particular parts of their business model, which they then can put an IP on and make that as the core of their business. This is totally fine. We believe in that approach, but we believe the underlying infrastructure should be commonly understood and shared and used, and also helps the standardization of processes. And at Nexus, we fund innovations in the space. So companies coming across a challenge where they believe, oh, I need to solve the data management of my energy access projects. But I believe this is a solution that also others in the sector could use. And I just need it to do it. And then they come to us and we say, we provide you with the necessary funds to develop this innovation, but it needs to be open source. And at one point, we were approached by a company called Power Trust wanting to unlock the renewable energy certificates market for decentralized energy systems, which couldn't participate in the market because it was like you have to fill PDF forms and so on to actually get these certificates, but you won't do that for mini grid and even less for a solar home system, like filling out a PDF form for like 50 watts hours produced in a month or something. No, for sure not. So we were approached by this company for decentralized renewable energy certificates and to finance this idea. And when we said, yeah, it's a great idea and it should be commonly available for the sector, and made open source, especially, and there I want to stress the point and the importance of open source for traceability and viability and trustworthiness of data through open source. So investors, whoever who is buying these kind of certificates, has a visibility on how they have been produced, where they have been produced, how they have been certified, that they've already been sold once. You can track all this because it's open source, and that's what we stressed in this development and funded this project. So I think I made my point on the importance of open source for this digital and data point in energy access, and happy to give back to Thomas.
I want to pick out 2 points that Vivian just made. One is basically viable business models. The whole idea of using data and digitalization is to reduce the cost for those people who are trying to make money in this sector. And we basically, as either the N-Access Foundation or Access to Energy Institute, take the development costs of the data solutions that you basically need. And for those who were here yesterday, there was a session where I made the argument that data can basically increase the trust between people who give money to the sector, whether they're funders or whether they're investors, and that basically not only is trust increased, but basically the transaction costs of doing business is just reduced. We all know that the sector sometimes is very manual and very analog. People still send Excel files through email in terms of reporting. That's not the kind of digitization we're talking about. And the next person to speak will tell you about the pains that donors are experiencing when it comes to data. Esmeralda Sandou has been working for many donors and has been responsible for shaping basically funding programs, and her experience is about the relevance of data, availability or not of data in this sketching funding programs. Esme.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for having me today. So I will draw examples on one program I'm currently advising. It's the Modern Cooking Facility for Africa, implemented and funded by NEFCO, the Nordic Environment Finance Corporation. But indeed, the examples I will share today can also be found in electrification programs, and they are common pain points. So when you design a program, you need to ground the decisions you make and the structure of the program in evidence. And it is a challenge to find updated, publicly available data just to, to create a program that makes sense, that answers the needs, that is agile, and in a cost-effective manner as well. So instead of this, a lot of programs start with a long scoping phase, whilst a lot of, the community as a whole has the data, and we could cut cost and time by just having data available more easily and sharing it between stakeholders in the community. So that's the first point I want to make, publicly available data. It doesn't have to be at the level of granularity where it's confidential data, but if there was more data sharing, we could deploy the funds more quickly and more effectively. The second point I want to make, when you are a donor or a program implementer, is MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification. It is a headache And it is a headache to think about a good MRV framework that will actually be relatively simple for the beneficiaries to implement. The thing is, we are accountable for deploying the funds. We are accountable for impact. We need to report on impact. We need to report to the funders of these programs. And we often push too much the burden of MRV onto the beneficiaries. And two things happen. There is a redundancy, which means less of the program goes to the final beneficiary, or less of the program actually, less of the money, sorry, goes to the to the firm itself for implementing the program. You end up with field surveys that cost a lot, and that also create barriers to disbursements. Disbursements that happen less often, that may be delayed because you end up not necessarily finding the same things that the beneficiaries, the firms have reported, create confusion, create delays, more cost of financing, etc. So there is here the need for creating trust between partners, having collect data in a verified manner, in a way that you can use for disbursing. But it's also a case of making it more cost effective, because at the end of the day, if you have redundant processes, first the donor ends up paying a lot of money for their own MRV processes, but then also the operator or the beneficiary ends up putting a lot of resources onto creating these Excel files, amending by hand these Excel files, and at the end it's less time from the operator and less money that is deployed to help the final beneficiary, the consumers, and less systems. And so I think in order to accelerate access to energy, whether it's electrification or access to clean cooking, at the end of the day we need to incorporate digital processes, create trust, transparency. Yeah, I think I'll stop here in order to let the floor to others. Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you for your contribution, Esme. The Access to Energy Institute, we're non-for-profit, so we don't have a product that we need to sell. We have the ability and luxury to basically be able to listen to the sector in terms of what are your pains when it comes to data and digitization. And when the Access to Energy was founded, Institute was founded 2019, Stefan, who basically is now the managing director and the technical mind behind Prospect, it's the conversation with different stakeholders in the sector that basically came together in proposing an open source platform, which is one of the topics we want to address today, which is an initial offering to the sector when it comes to basically aggregating, validating, and analyzing data which is existing in the sector. It's an initial offering, it's not a finished product that is not going to change, and it will live from the interaction with you. If you have specific needs when it comes to data, you can come to us and we can see how we can implement that within Prospect. And Stefan is going to give you a very quick introduction of the main features of Prospect that may be a beginning of a conversation between you and us.
Thank you, Thomas, and good morning, everybody. I'm Stefan. Thanks for the introduction. Maybe just to start, before jumping into features and highlights of Prospect itself, maybe a good year ago, we were sitting together with our colleagues from GET.invest, and we were in a brainstorming and a workshop that has almost the same topic as we are talking about today. And the question was like, what is holding us back achieving SDG 7, and what can data do to strive towards these aims? And one of the key outcomes, and I think it was already like pointed out by the people before me here on the panel, is to say, okay, how can we use data as a kind of infrastructure for the sector? How can we make it available at low cost or at no cost at all for all people who want to share data, people who need verification of data, and people who need data to drive their processes? We strongly believe that using this data in an automated way, in a verified way, and in a very structured way will push the sector forward, because it will create trust. And I think in the end it's all about trust. Trust is needed to drive investment towards the beneficiaries, Because if you don't have trust, you will not invest. And if you don't have sufficient trust, you need a lot of supportive actions to create this trust. Let it be a lot of MRV on the ground, a lot of due diligence, a lot of checks, all these things that basically slow down the processes, that keep on additional costs for the donors, but also for the beneficiaries. And in the end, slow down the total process, and we don't have much time. Everybody knows this, we don't have much time. The target is very ambitious, and we have to shift another gear. So that's what we started with a good year ago, and basically we came up with a solution of Prospect. And the idea was, and the idea still is, to say we provide a free-to-use, open-source platform that really focuses on the aggregation, validation, and verification of data, and makes it available to everybody who needs this data and wants to share this data with third parties. It's not simply a reporting tool that you as a distributor or as an energy service provider use to report your progress towards your investors, but it's a tool that allows you to improve your own operations by basically reflecting the data back to you in a structured and organized way and visualizations. And I'm more than happy to, for anybody who is interested, and as Thomas already mentioned earlier, to showcase you the imminent basically uses of the software on the booth. But basically it also allows you basically to control directly who you share data with. Basically you as a user of Prospect stay owner of the data. And what do you think, okay, what makes Prospect special here? First of all, we try to automate as much as possible. So we don't rely on manual uploads of Excel sheets that then have to be cleaned and have a lot of like validation issues. We try to connect, or we are connecting all available automated data sources that are available for the sector. That means basically sensoric data from IoT-enabled machines, let it be inverters, let it be solar home systems, let it be smart meters, whatever is around. On top of this, integration with all the big CRM systems that are available to basically take data from these, integration with mobile money operators, and all available data sources that can provide automatic data to then triangulate these data sources and basically create a trust level. Just give you an example. If you have a transaction, a sale, like an energy connection on a household on a mini grid, basically you can claim this. That's basically one data source. It's not very trustworthy yet. If we get basically data from the smart meter directly through the smart meter API, the trust level already increases. If we then basically also get corresponding data from a mobile money provider that you pay for this account, then we have a very high level of confidence that this connection is actually up and running and consuming electricity. So basically you don't have to send somebody anymore to check if the connection is really there. You can use data and data stacking and triangulation to verify this. That's basically the core principle of Prospect as we developed it. And basically just before handing over to the other panelists, like focusing on highlighting two features, which I think sets Prospect apart, is data privacy and data security. So basically, first of all, the key principle is the data belongs to the people who share the data. They have full control. This data is not pushed somewhere and then gets disseminated without control. Everybody who provides data to the platform stays the owner of this data, and they can granularly control who has access at which point in time to the data. Because you can say a certain set of my data is going to my investors to report basically on my progress towards basically my KPIs towards the investor. The other part of the data is going to the rural or electrification agency to basically report progress on basically the electrification strategy implementation in a particular country, and so on and so on. So basically there is no transfer of ownership, and we basically really center the whole platform around this. Also security. Basically we make very sure that no data is leaked. And the third one is about PII, personalized, personal identifiable information. Basically we try to not disseminate any kind of like personal data that is not needed. So basically Prospect is not saving any PII related data. We pseudonymize, we blur data when it is imported into the platform, basically, and just reduce basically this pseudonymized and anonymized view for the purpose of verification and validation. There's a bit more about this topic, so happy to discuss it on one-on-one if somebody is interested, how we solve this issue on Prospect, but I think it's a very special way of treating data and really keeping a strong focus on this topic. So I spent quite a few minutes, so Thomas, please, back to you.
Any data platform or any data tool is only as good as long as it's used by people. Because if you just put something out there and nobody sees a practical value in using it, you may as well, close it and put it in the bin. And I want to invite Bright Chifulo, who's the technical director and IT manager at the Rural Electrification Agency of Zambia, to tell us his story in terms of data experience. Because to me and to us, the Rural Electrification Agency of Zambia is a first mover when it comes to putting data at the core of their mandate. And I think your story is going to be very interesting, in particular the historical evolution of availability of data for your organization. Bright, you have the floor.
Thank you, Thomas. Good morning. Basically, the story for us started in 2021. In 2021, RIA Zambia, which is a board that was formed by government to spearhead the rural electrification program in the country. And we were given the mandate basically to move the electrification rate from the 3% which we had the time that it was formed to 51% by 2030. Now in 2021, the Rural Electrification Authority in Zambia basically targeted to move into renewable energy, into solar mini grids, and we needed to basically implement a lot of projects in this space. So we had about 1,593 solar mini milling plants, which were implemented by government in the various parts of the country. And these milling plants basically had excess power, which we needed to evacuate and be able to connect the communities around those plants. So we thought, well, once we do this, this will be quite massive when we add to the other projects which we had. We also had projects funded by the European Union under the Increased Access to Electricity and Renewable Energy, IREP, where we were expecting to have up to 126 solar mini grids. We also had our own funding basically from government, and we were expected to implement about 20 solar mini grids. And we also had funding from World Bank under the Increased Service under ESAP project, where we were expecting to distribute about 15,000 solar home systems and a number of mini grids as well. So when we looked at this portfolio, we thought once these are actualized, the challenge that we were going to have was how to manage these, was how to monitor these, was how to report on these to the various stakeholders. And with that challenge at the fore, we started looking for a solution that could aggregate this information, that where we could collect all this information into one place. And we tried to ride on the success of the Beyond the Grid Zambia, which is Beyond the Grid Africa now. And when we visited them, we found that they had a project, they had a platform which we are using called the Energy Data Information System for Off-Grid Networks. And basically they were using Edison to monitor the solar home systems by the various participants on that program. And we thought, well, can't we extend the functionality of this platform to meet our data needs? And that brought us into discussion with RIP, the technology team at RIP, who had developed the Edison. So they agreed to explore that route, and with the assistance from CEDA, they funded basically that pilot. And we started with a detailed scoping exercise with the technology team from RIP. After the exercise, basically we established our data needs, and we established what we needed in terms of data collection, data reporting, and all that. So we put up what we call the future data use plan, which basically outlined our requirements, and we prioritized those requirements. these were basically fed into the development of the EDSON, into extending EDSON to cover our data needs. We first of all agreed with RIP team that we needed to do a pilot. So we started a pilot on one of the mini grids called Campekete, which we used basically for just to collect data and see how far we could go. And this lasted a year up to 2022 March when we closed the pilot. And it was a success pilot exercise. We were able to collect data from the from the plant. We were able to see in real time the generation, the consumption, even at individual customer points. Except we couldn't collect the real-time information because we didn't have smart meters at the endpoints. So what we had was offline information collected and then fed into the platform. But at least it gave us the ability to report and to see the consumption patterns and all that. So it worked very well. So at the close, we felt, I think we needed now to fully explore the extension of the capabilities of this platform. Except we found that the platform that we had was basically initially meant to be a data warehouse system. Now, data warehouse systems by nature, you find that they are more historical. They are not meant to give you real-time information. So it meant that it needed to be a lot of technical input had to go in to basically reprogram and enable it to give us historical information as well as almost real-time or real-time information from these plants. So when at the time that we were ending the pilot, EDSON was also transitioning to Prospect and moving from RIP to GIZ and A2AI coming into play as experts in terms of development. So we thought, well, which I think that was a good thing for us, and we'll move with it as well as we explore that journey. So basically, we started with a Prospect, transition from EDSON into Prospect, and we have seen the development, and we have fed into the development in terms of our requirements, and up to the time that we are seeing the first version now. We have currently we have about 9 mini grids which we have on the platform. We have data coming from our ESAP project where we are tracking the connections on that project, and we are going to add more mini grids to the platform. What it has done is that it has aggregated all these platforms which we have into one place. That has made it easy for us to be able to have insight into the operations of these plants, to be able to report to just internally first of all, and we are hoping that we'll be able now to, when it comes to reporting to government, we won't need to basically start sending files. We'll give a connection, a link to the government officials, and they'll be able to see our efforts from that particular platform. And further, we also have ESAP, we are funded by World Bank. We are just starting to deploy now those solar home systems, and that's a platform that we're going to use basically for monitoring, verification, and reporting on that particular project to the funders. So basically, it's something that we feel it's meeting our needs, and it will continue meeting our needs going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brighton. I think it's worth for those who haven't seen the product Prospect or the platform yet to have a look at the dashboards that were developed together with RIA Zambia, because it's based on, so it's not us saying this is how you will report data. You came with your requirements, your mandate, and you're using that in your everyday work to unlock the capital that you need for your rural electrification strategies. And it's the first time that I see, on-grid, mini-grid, and off-grid data represented in one dashboard, which, in the end is relatively simple, but it hasn't been done before. And I'd like to invite Thomas Samuel, the founder and CEO of Suna, to tell us about another set of pains when data is not available and how the non-availability of data is hindering any kind of rational and effective electrification strategy. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. Actually, everything I wanted to say has already been said, so I will just highlight a couple of short stories about why data is important to create a strong private sector that will electrify Africa, because, of course, it will rely on local entrepreneurs that will do the job on the ground. First story, we are deploying at the moment 50,000 solar streetlights in Togo. That project was funded by the French government, and we are doing a EPCF contract where we are selling an installed product. We rely on local installers to do the job. Also, like the political vision was to put those streetlights in CISO villages, the villages that are eligible for electrification with solar home systems, which is great. But because there is no platform that monitors everything, the solar home systems operator are putting their product wherever they want. They have not selected exactly the village, and there is no precise GPS location reporting. And this is a huge pain, because when we have been asked to deploy those 50,000 streetlights in those villages, actually those villages or those hamlets were not known by anyone. So we had to create the whole deployment plan and doing the whole screen of the country to see where are the power lines, where is the grid extension program, where will be the mini grid. And so by elimination, we have our hamlets or villages, and they may not have administrative things. It may not be a village. It can be, as they call here in Côte d'Ivoire, un campement, which is a settlement of people that are not really recognized by the government, but still they need light. So we did that job, and that, of course, is a huge work. Could have been eased by proper data owned by the government, and is reducing our capacity to deploy and go fast to bring this public service to people. This is one story. And the second story that will maybe give ideas of a question is a country which is one of, I won't say the country, but one of the most advanced country in Western Africa regarding universal access. And they have an ambition plan for universal access. And they said, okay, we have 3 pillars: grid extension, mini-grid, solar home systems, and we know a country, and we know that there is something like 4,000 communities that will be electrified by solar home systems because hard to reach, blah, blah. And they have counted everything, and at the end they say, okay, this is missing 30,000 households for reaching our universal access. And when you go on the field, 50,000 households, it's met like you have not done a tenth of the country, you have already found your 30,000 connection. So there is a huge gap between the reality on the field and what the government knows as their need. So 2 stories to illustrate that the work that the sector is doing with prospect is very much needed by agencies, governments, and private sector. For example, or in general data, will hopefully be understood. And everyone needs to train the sector, because I finish with that. Capacity building will be key, because local electrification agencies, they need to understand how they can use, they can own the data with all the privacy needed and everything.
Thank you, Thomas. 50,000 street lamps, how much money is that roughly? I mean, the contract value is what, $30–40 million, roughly?
It's a $40 million, just numbers, $40 million. It costed us $4 million to do the deployment plan.
And I'm still amazed that you can sign a $40 million contract and there's no platform, no remote monitoring capacity. And I think one of the aims of Prospect and other digital solutions in the space is to support the entrepreneurs who are doing these kind of jobs, because it needs to be part of the monitoring. You cannot install 50,000 street lamps and then just hope that they're working. And I think we will go into Q&A mode after a last contribution. Maybe you can think of those data gaps, data ability gaps, data analysis gaps that are pains for you, and then with whomever on the panel we can try to address whether we know a solution or whether we can help you develop a solution. And after the Q&A, we should go, for those interested, to the booth to have, you know, specific demonstration of some of the dashboards that were developed with rural electrification agencies, investors, funders, and companies working on the ground, so you can see how certain modules of Prospect are already solving problems, with the idea and the objective to basically you give us the ideas of how this platform, which is completely open source and which should be community driven, can evolve so as to help you solve your specific data problems. I'm going to ask Stefan to finish the contributions with one of the, basically connecting the dots of many of the statements this morning around one of the new products or projects which are going to be launched in the next couple of days, which are essentially and really intrinsically digital.
Thanks, Thomas. And as you said, it's about like connecting different stories, maybe. And one thing which we think is very innovative and shows basically very practically what a data platform, digitalization can really bring here. And it's not just talking about unlocking investment into the sector, but really showcasing a very particular example we already achieved after a couple of months of work, where basically get additional funding into the sector. And this example I want to showcase basically includes what was mentioned earlier by Vivian, the direct platform, which is basically has been sponsored by the N-Access Foundation initially to get grown up. Basically we have Bright here from the RIA Zambia, basically as a basically a representative for mini grids being operated right now in Zambia, which basically share their data on a day-to-day, real-time, automatic way through basically the automatic sensoring through the inverters and the smart meters that are connected to the grids, directly to Prospect, where we do a verification, an assessment of the data, a cleaning of the data, making sure this data is correct and is basically trustworthy. And then, in the next step, and that's basically something that will go live in the very next day in the first pilot phase with the RIA Zambia and DREC, we are currently sending this data to the DREC organization, which basically certifies these generation data. And we have a pilot buyer for this pilot project who basically will buy these DRECs, and basically the money will get transferred directly to the operator, the owner of the data on the mini grid. So basically there will be no man in the middle, there will be no cuts, it will be immediate, and basically as more data is connected to the grids, basically to the system, automatically more DRECs will be certified, issued, and given a buyer will be bought, and basically we can create a direct link between basically the offset market on the one side, on the racks, and the generation on the ground without let's say a lot of loss, so to say, of basically a dollar spent and a dollar received. That is something, you know, if we want to prove this, we want to show this as the first real practical innovative model here, and I hope it basically will just be the first step towards a very digital end-to-end distribution chain when it comes to certification and investment into certifications. Thank you.
And I think that story really, you know, kind of makes the claim of, so it's about trust, so, you know, verification of the data, and then it's about lowering the cost or actually bringing new revenue. So, you know, the mini-grid organizations have all been struggling for profitability, have tried everything they could in the last couple of years, and now suddenly a really low cost and completely automated mechanism comes in, which is generating revenue for every, you know, direct that is produced by mini-grid providers. Don't tell them, because they're going to be lining up our door and it's going to be a lot, but, you know, it's just a very impressive examples. I would like to open the floor for questions. You can ask them in French or in English, and the floor is yours, and I'm happy to come with a microphone to the first person with a question. If you introduce yourself, that would be helpful.
Do I sit or stand? Or any? Do I sit or stand?
You can stand or sit. You are more comfortable.
All right, thank you very much, Thomas. My name is Dennis Nderitu. I work with the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, based out of Nairobi. And we are working in several countries in Africa and some other regions of the world. I think for us, the main drive for all these products is reducing the cost of electricity, because our main clients are the people, and yeah, it's in our name, and definitely we want to make sure that we can drive more investment into the space. So I have, I think, 3 questions, and some of them are comments as well. So the first one is, I think this applies to Prospect on being a free of charge and an open source platform. One of the challenges that we've had when speaking with developers and financiers is, what is the real value add to the companies for them to share their data with anyone else? I think that question, it's clear what the value add is, but when it comes to them having a competitive edge, them not sharing what they feel are their trade secrets, how do you make sure that that is not part of what is put out there, given all the work that these developers or solar home system companies have actually done to get to that position? And is there any impact to investment from this? Sharing data, has it resulted in them receiving more funding? Is there a direct correlation, so that when you're talking about that, then and not only I think on those new areas of revenues like the carbon attributes, but is there any other? Because I think the stack that developers need to continue expanding and scaling up their operations is a lot more than what carbon attributes can do. It needs to be a full stack of so many avenues of funding. The second one is the alignment with financials. So yesterday we had a forum on PUE here, and the discussion was around what do financials want to see from this business model so that they can continue putting in money. Is there a mechanism where these platforms go back to investors who are interested in the space and ask them, are these the key metrics that you want to see? And what else would you want to see, so that we can make sure that that discussion is, it's end to end, and I think for governments as well. And lastly is on being an open source data platform, who actually owns the data in the last place? I think there's been this concept that data is quite valuable. I don't know how much valuable it is, but who owns it, and what is the opportunity cost of providing this data to that party to own it for a local developer or a local entrepreneur?
I think we're going to take the first question is going to be answered by Thomas, and I will maybe complement. Second question will be Stefan, and then third question.
Regarding the interest for private sector, it looks like I represent the private sector, and there is a lot of bullshit in the sector. And this whole bullshit and fume and vape has hindered the development of the sector. For example, the rent-to-own pay-as-you-go thing, which has been pitched as electrification, which is not giving like long-lasting connection. If there were real data about energy access after a couple of years of people reimbursing their kit, that could be a problem. So it's difficult it's important for companies that provide long-lasting connection to be able to show those connections and to show the difference between some other things happening around. This is one thing. For example, for solar streetlights, solar streetlight has a very bad reputation. Like everyone thinks this is shitty thing that never works, which is the truth. Like most projects have been failures, but if you don't have project where you monitor real long-last performance and you give access to those data to governments and to everyone who wants to see it, the sector will continue thinking that it's like all messed up kind of technologies that don't perform and give long-lasting lighting service. And actually, I'll finish on this, giving and providing to governments, donors and everything our own data is proving our work and proving our thesis. And a lot of people don't want to do that because they know their data is not accurate. And for example, if you are providing lighting service, if you just show where your product is, it's not good for the sector. Same if you are saying to your donors that you are providing connection and you have just like dropped a product there, which is not a connection, it may not be good for you as the private sector. And because the sector, and I finish on this is very difficult for venture capital backed companies where they have to say that they have been doing a lot or too much or too fast, and not proving what is their real impact on the field. But this is short term versus long term. For companies that want to go long term, giving all data is absolutely key.
I'm going to complement that with the story. I met an investor who was invested in a solar water company and said, my investee has installed X hundred solar water pumps. And I asked the investor, said, but do you know these things are working? I'm told they're working. But I said, do you know where they're installed? If there's an impact and a development associated with a solar water pump, I need to know it's running. I need to know there's a yield increase at the level of the farmer. If that's not the case, it's probably not a good investment. That is a requirement, that is a private requirement between the investor and the investee to share specific data, which will increase the trust level of the investor. And I was making the claim yesterday on the panel to say, when we sign contracts, the MRV part comes at the bottom of the contract, paragraph 13 or 14. We should put that at the top and say, what is the real-time or not real-time information that will be digitally available to both the investee, who can report, this is my success, and the investor looking at it, and whether it's a commercial investor or a GEP funding things. It's exactly the same requirement. And I think, Esme, you have a contribution on that as well, please do.
Yes, if I can add something. In some countries, you have more than one program, and sometimes many, many programs, and there are overlaps. And at the end of the day, when the private sector is a beneficiary of many programs, there might be a temptation, if there are no transparent data, to provide to submit as reporting the same systems to that donor or that donor. I'm not saying it's everywhere, but that has happened. And this is a question of additionality. You don't want the systems to be subsidized 3 times. So I think if there is a platform that enables something that, if there is, all right, it's okay. I think the room is small enough. If there is a platform that enables some sort of sharing data in a transparent manner and helping donors understand which system is reporting to whom, it doesn't have to be exclusive, but at least it's transparent.
And maybe to wrap this up and go to the second question on the KPIs and metrics, I think like in the last weeks and months, I talked to a lot of distributors on the ground, also the Unicode developers, and basically unisono, it was like, yes, please take my data, because the key point is it's a lot of effort to report on multiple programs, because there's a high prone of error. So basically there's a high risk that I report something wrong, which I might be taken accountable for in the future. So basically that's a fear of people who basically have to report on different programs, and it distracts them a lot from their key business. And I'll be honest, the business of the private business in the sector is super complex and complicated. I have a 10 years background in private business here, and I'm really, I can fully judge this is one of the most complex businesses I've ever stumbled upon. So basically managing in its own, it's difficult enough. And then basically you have to manage different layers of funding, sustainability, and reporting. It is a huge effort. So the least resistance to the idea of sharing data to one platform that can be used if it's under your control comes from distributors, from data providers. So basically I have this question often, and that's basically the interesting thing is it's the least resistance over there. Yes, quality distributors, obviously, not people who might, don't want to share their data. That's a good question. Why people might not want to share their data. And maybe add one additional layer is we don't want to use it only as a reporting tool, as I said. It should reflect, and it should basically allow and enable operators on the ground, ESPs on the ground, to improve their business, to be more successful. So basically that's why we take the data, not only report it up, but we create metrics, we create dashboard, we create KPIs to help them to improve their business. Basically, we apply standard metrics, standard best practices in solar home systems, in mini grids, to say, okay, this is your data, this is how it looks like from a metric point of view, and these are the points you should focus on. And make it very simple, make it understandable. On the one side for investors, basically use standard KPIs and metrics for investors, but more important even, to say use these metrics in a way that an ESP on the ground, an energy service provider, can use it to become better, because that's in the end what we want, and we want to be able that these people can achieve their goals, and as more successful the players are on the ground, as better it is for the whole thing. So I'm more than happy to basically show you through a bit later to say, okay, what metrics are we developing, which are the dashboards, the KPIs. We are working with, let's say, industry consultants to say, okay, these are standard metrics that have been developed already, we just implemented. And these are additional metrics we think are sensible. I've been working, with a large player in the sector for a lot of years now in the past, and basically you're looking at a multi-million portfolio. So basically I really understand what are the questions that investors and donors are asking on these large portfolios. So that's why basically I'm very much driven by exactly this point. So it's a point mirroring it back, making use of, like allowing people who share the data to make use of it, not only use it as a reporting tool, but also as this.
There was one last point, I think, who owns the data? So very importantly, when data is transitioned through prospect to, say, an investor, whoever gives the data to prospect owns the data. Prospect never owns the data. So we're not the ones, sitting on the data, and you as the data sharer can very specifically decide who sees the data. So it's not like you put the data on prospect and it's in the internet or something. So because it's sensitive data, we're talking payment data, we're talking things you don't want in the open, So very specifically, you decide who sees and who does not see the data, to make it very clear.
Sorry, Vivian, last point, there was opportunity cost, just a quick one. Maybe looking at Bright here, basically when we onboarded the mini-grids to the platform, how long did it take roughly to add a new mini-grid?
Yeah, I think the last time we added the mini-grids, that was within 5 minutes. We are up. Yeah.
The focus is on really easy to use. We don't want to make it complicated. You don't have to ask us. There's an interface I can show you. You click through. Here you go. Thank you.
We did it live yesterday with a person who had actually Razvan. We did a live onboard, just putting you to the spot, with a Victron meter here at the conference. Further questions from the audience?
I think there was one, Thomas?
Oh, Vijay, pardon.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the open source part, because I know that like open source and data security and data sovereignty are sometimes a bit misunderstood. So that open source also means your data are open or unsecure, and we are pretty much convinced it's the opposite. I mean, there's this approach in IT like security through obscurity, which has been used a lot. However, it has proven that this has often failed because of the obscurity in the end. Like there are also personal switches in companies and so on. And so nobody knows anymore where some data sets or libraries are lying. And in the end, that's exactly what makes it unsecure. So if the structure which is collecting and routing the data is open source and understandable and well documented, it's actually much safer, your data, than if it would be like this approach of security through obscurity. So that's also a very important part of the data security, is this open source aspect.
Isona from Energize Africa. I'm just wondering from a lender's perspective if there's a risk that this is actually going to increase the cost of capital. If lenders can see which systems are performing, not performing, what's being paid back, what's not being paid back, and to what extent you've engaged with private lenders to gauge their appetite for the data.
What's your opinion?
I think that the trust and the verification is a really important aspect, and you've pointed out, Thomas, that some companies will not be keen to share their data, and there's probably a very good reason why. So as a lender, I would say that we would be looking for companies who are willing to, but there's also, I think, the reality that the more data we have on the performance of solar home systems, of solar streetlights, the more we see that certain things are not functioning or not being paid for, and that across the market, that effectively increases the cost of capital.
Transparency is a double-edged sword. So, they will exactly help to basically identify those things that work and that don't work. As a lender, even if you put up, a risk premium, you want to be working with those people who give you the data. And we shouldn't be funding things that structurally don't work. And, that will free capital to do stuff that we know works. So, it's difficult to say we shouldn't be transparent regarding data, and it was because it's going to increase the cost of lending. Certain things should not be lent to, full stop. And hopefully, new areas and new opportunities of investment will become more, much clearer, that may have been underestimated simply because data was not available. And that's my hope, that you will see shifts of capital maybe in areas which have been underserved by financing. But Thomas or Stefan, anybody wants to?
Yeah, regarding, it's a very good point, and you are talking about debt or equity when you're debt. Okay. Of course, it should, but the risk is so high that, of course, the debt should be extremely expensive, and the equity, because there is absolutely little hope for return on investment on equity in that sector, because honestly, there is no real track record, and they may not be in the coming years. So debt should be extremely expensive, but depend on what you want to finance and which kind of debt. Like some projects should be financed by concessional debt to governments to fund local players to implement projects. So it's different, but at the end, this is not the real game, because if you are talking about a country as a beneficiary of an electrification program, the cost of capital or debt and thing is not important compared to the huge losses, inefficacies of like double equipment in areas that are not well mapped, private sector inefficacy because they don't know where to send you and etc. So the overall cost for the electrification plan could be decreased, but for sure for special aspect of it, it will increase, but logically, I think.
And I'm also thinking of certain funds which, you know, are lending and can't really report in a convincing manner the impact that they're having, the kind of data transparency, and in particular the kind of, you know, very pragmatic approach at the beginning of signing the contract. What data will it deliver to you? And it should be easier for those successful funds to raise another fund compared to the non-availability of data today. That's my hope, at least. Does that partially answer your question?
Maybe in the end it boils down to the question, is it better to know the actual state now or a bit down the road when the whole thing goes south?
That's a question for the networking tonight. Any other questions from the audience?
Hi, my name is Ido Verhaag. I'm with FRES, Foundation Rural Energy Services. We have operations in Uganda, Mali, Burkina and Guinea-Bissau. We've been providing energy as a service for 25 years, but in digitalization, really a late starter. I started myself 3 years ago and I realized that I need everything that you are mentioning here to really, because this is closing the business model of energy as a service for payment rates, but also for tracking battery life. The only thing one of the things I'm struggling with is the cost of communication, because I guess you would have to equip all our systems, all our standalone systems with a data card. That will be quite difficult in some of the areas where we work where there's not even telephone. What is your experience with, not having any communication networks available, but also the cost of the data per system, because that will be cost for the consumers.
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I just want to point out a particularity of open source again. I mean, that's what I'm here for on this panel, so that's why I triggered it, sorry. As one of the innovations that Nexus has funded, we have actually funded an answer to your problem, which is Airlink, which allows through Bluetooth chips and smartphones to make assets which are standing where there is no data communication or where data communication is just too expensive. I mean, for a solar light, you possibly won't put a GSM module because it just triples the price of the product, or where there is no communication. And via this open source solution, which the whole protocol is open source, the app is open source, you can pick up the data from time to time with a smartphone by an agent passing by or so on. And the great thing about open source again and open source platforms is this can then very easily be integrated in platforms like Prospect or so on. And this is the kind of ecosystem of open source platforms, Prospect and all the other open source tools that we believe in are around, that they can benefit companies like yours and help you, being more viable.
Maybe just, sorry, there was one last thing to this particular question. obviously not every asset has to be connected, else the whole thing will be very limited. So we try, as I mentioned, this stacked triangulation of data. So we try to use all different data sources that are available. And like one thing, especially for this kind of use cases, is something we developed. We call it the digital MRV, which in the end is basically a bot that can be run through WhatsApp or through SMS. That basically allows you to basically reach out automatically through the platform to a subset of the beneficiaries and send them basically specialized questionnaires for free, where they can basically take a picture of the installation, they can tell what they think about it, they can go through a questionnaire, you can freely design it, and basically immediately, when a customer press send, basically you get the results on the platform and you can go through it. So basically we try to explore different avenues to get reliable and trustworthy data on the ground. And I mean, I can showcase it to you directly afterwards, and I think it's quite impressive because when you're sending a position through WhatsApp, it's super accurate. You know, you have it in real time, you know exactly where the asset is, or basically the installation or the connection. So that's what it's saying, you know, it doesn't have to be like a one GSM connection of systems. So there's a multitude of open source tools that work together to achieve these goals. And that's our idea. Create a network, create a platform that consists of multiple solutions that allow you to achieve the goal. So, thanks.
Can Razvan have the microphone?
No, I think I can try to speak.
No, but we need it for the translation.
For the translation. Hi, I'm Razvan. I'm with Green People's Energy GBE in Benin. And one of the questions, I think they would go for, one question would go to probably NX and Suma, or Suna, one of the two. It's regarding the monitoring for solar lamps, or street lamps. And this is something that we've been discussing in Benin, and together we have here also the Rural Electrification Agency from Benin. And one of the things that we were trying to think about, and then I put the question to you, is what is the purpose of monitoring of solar streetlights versus mini-grids or SHS or social infrastructure? And the difference is that for most streetlights, we only want to know if it's working or not, whereas for the others, we want to look at consumption and patterns and things like that. So that simplifies it. But at the same time, it's very expensive to put GSM and other things into solar streetlights. And so one of the things that we were thinking of was like social monitoring. And this, for example, you have in the UK where each streetlight has a code, and you can call a call center and say the streetlight is not working. But you're working a lot with streetlights and innovative approaches. I was wondering if you can share some low-cost ways or some good examples of making sure that we have this sort of remote monitoring of streetlights.
Okay, then I can take this one. To answer for that, when you are selling products, and in our deployment of the 50,000 solar streetlights in Togo, we are using this social monitoring because there is we don't sell lighting service, and I'll come back on that. So of course, every product has a reference. There is a toll-free and a WhatsApp number, a platform, and anyone can report any failure. And we have in our contract the obligation to go once per year to check all the products which are Bluetooth connected, and we can download the log of every streetlight to make sure that it has performed properly. That data is gathered on the platform, and we report on overall the taux de charge in English, like not taux de charge, like we have sold 98% of lighting throughout the year. So the percentage of light provided throughout the year for the overall 50,000 streetlights. And this is done once a year. We report, we give that data to the execution agency, which is the Rural Electrification Agency. This is one, and this is one way to do it low cost, village-based, no communication. Other point, solar streetlights in urban area where you sell a service. Each light need to give the same amount of light at the same time, could give uniform lighting. So those lights need to be remote, like real-time remote monitored, and it has a cost. which is capex cost and an opex cost, because you have communication cost, but you transform your business model and you no longer sell product, you sell a lighting service that can be rented by a government. And this cost is taken into the whole business model.
Thank you, Thomas. I would take one last question in the audience and then close the session. You have a microphone. Perfect.
Hello, my name is Christine from GBE Ghana, and my question is mainly to investor. I don't know about the Zambian issue, whether I had to pass through, let's say, local banking system or something like that, to the private sector. So we're talking about a lot of data that would check monitoring, that would validate or maybe let us see performance and give some investor confidence. But on the upstream, let's say top-down approach, before an investor would invest in the private sector of a particular country, do we have any instance of data that validates or that kind of pre-informs investor confidence, even if it has to pass through the local banking system? Because this is not the traditional lending way. We know how the banking system does its own credit analysis and all those, and this is different. This is performance-based, this is driving SDGs, I mean, all sorts of looks at it. So do we have any practical instance where reporting through, maybe from private sector through the local banking system to the investor, or that other way down, to validate or improve some investment confidence or investor confidence? I don't know if any of you can share a real data instance on that. Thank you.
Maybe I can take a start and happy to basically get additional inputs on that. So basically there is no ready-made system that basically includes the current banking structure in Ghana for sure. But basically the core idea, what we want to do is to say, okay, we basically are able to verify already existing performance of people, of companies on the ground. Basically they can share their data even before they basically get funding. And then this track record, the certified track record of these people on the ground, with a caveat that it might be not as rose as people would like to have it, but in the end it's the truth. Basically, that's basically actually what's happening. And you can see also tendency. You can see people are getting better, people are getting worse, or basically keeping at a certain level. And this can then inform an investment decision by a commercial or by a publicly driven lender based on past performance, with the assumption that basically lending will not significantly, water down the performance of the past, ideally improve it. So basically our approach would be to say, let's use data already before an investment decision, to use it as a basically proven track record. And basically our role as prospect is to put a stamp on it and say, we verified it. We didn't verify the data in terms of this is true or not. We say, okay, we added a certain probability by using our metrics, saying, okay, this data is very likely or not likely accurate.
Stefan, we have something coming up in a couple of weeks which will be around payment performance. Is this something we can already say now, or is it too early?
It's a bit like the KPIs and metrics I mentioned earlier, where we want to apply standardized metrics for all the players, especially we're starting with solar home systems for now, because there we have a vast experience and a lot of work has been already done on this. For instance, by Gogla with their pay-go-perform metrics. And then we would like to extend it further into other segments. Say, okay, can we drive these default metrics, default KPIs? We can create benchmarks of players in the sector, which then will definitely help A, the players to improve on their fields of improvement, but B, drive investment decision and put a price tag, put a risk price tag on a particular investment without too much unknowns. I mean, it will always be unknowns, but let's reduce the unknowns.
Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much to a very participative audience. And thank you very much to the translators in the back. Merci, messieurs. You're doing an amazing job. You're hidden in the... Give them a hand, because they're doing a really, really hard job. We're speaking too fast. There's a 30-minute break, but because we're 5 minutes late, your coffee break has been reduced by 5 minutes. Blame us. And please come and see us at the booths to discuss any matter we would not have covered in this session. Thank you very much.